Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Off-Road Hub. My name is Ken. Thank you so much for watching. Today, we are going to go through the process of changing a CV axle on my 2010 Toyota FJ Cruiser. Okay, so here are the tools that I'm going to be using to do this job. I have an M18 Milwaukee impact driver. I have the necessary spline socket for my lug nuts. I have a bottle jack stand all in one unit. Really handy. I got that off of Amazon. There goes the truck over there. I've got a torque wrench for putting my lug nuts back on, and a screwdriver that'll help me get the dust cap off of the flathead screwdriver. Help me get the dust cap off the hub. A hammer, which I'll use a couple different times. You'll see needle nose pliers for a cotter pin. A 35mm socket. That is for the axle nut. That is 35mm. That's on all FJ Cruisers, to the best of my knowledge. A 19mm socket. Those are the only sockets you'll need, I think. And then I've got a pry bar, and I also have a Pronetic CV lasso. Now, typically you'd use a pry bar like this to get the CV axle to come out of the differential, but this CV lasso by Pronetic, which they're not making currently, unfortunately, is the best tool I've ever seen for removing a CV axle, and you'll see why. I've got a new CV axle to put in, and I'm also going to be using the factory bottle jack, the one that's stored in back that you never use, but I'm going to use it today. And then I've got something to put my knees on because I don't like my knees digging in the ground. So these are all things I keep in the vehicle all the time so that I can change a CV axle when I'm out on a trail. So I would recommend having these tools or similar tools as you go out on the trails. So let's get to it. All right, next just pop off this dust cap. Just like that. Remove this cotter pin. Just bend it up. Squeeze it together the best you can. It should come out without too much trouble. There we go. Pull that off. That just retains the axle nut. Now with the vehicle jacked up, it can be a little difficult to get this axle nut off if you're just using a wrench, because you're going to turn the axle nut and it's just going to turn the wheel. So the best way to do this, if you don't have an impact and you're just using a big ratchet, is to have someone go in and with their hand just push the brake pedal, and that'll keep the brake rotor from turning. Of course, it's much easier to use an impact. At this point, I also like to make sure that the CV axle is loose in the hub, because this is the easiest point. Everything's still tight, and so we're changing the axle, so these threads don't matter too much, but you can put the nut back on there and just give it a tap with a hammer like that, just to get the axle moving out of the hub. That'll make things a lot easier here in a few minutes. All right, the next thing you're gonna do is remove these two bolts right here. These are 19mm, so you need a 19mm socket for those. So now the knuckle and the lower control arm should be separated. You can see, there they are. See how they're separate now? So at this point, all you have to do is pull this out. You don't have to touch the brakes. You don't have to touch the tie rod. Just leave all that in there. Just pull out these 2 bolts. That's it. So just grab the CV axle back here, grab this right here, and just give it a pull. Give the axle another little tap to get it coming out. That's kind of fighting me a little bit. Give it a wiggle. There it is. See, all this just lifts right out of the way, no problem. So you don't have to touch the tie rod or the brakes or anything. Be careful not to pull that too much, but it's okay. And there you have it. So what needs to happen now is that you need to separate the axle from the differential right here. So lots of times people will stick a pry bar right here and try to pry the axle out. That works usually, but it can be a little bit difficult because you're not pulling really straight on the axle, and access isn't too great back there. You can only get it from a couple different angles. So I actually like to use this CV lasso. Now, like I said, you can't buy the Pronetic CV lasso from Apache off-road anymore. But you could probably get a rope and kind of do the same thing. It might not be as durable, but basically it's just a slip knot there and a loop at this end to put a big hammer into. And so you just slide this up over the axle and then get it around the inside of the axle here. There we go. So now we've got a nice solid way to pull on that axle. Just stick your hammer through here. This is a 3-pound sledge. Works pretty well for this. And then just give it a swing. Just like that. Popped it right out. Now you can see I'm not really losing any gear oil, any fluid from the differential. And that's because the vehicle is jacked up on this side, and so it's leaning. So all that fluid is being kept inside the differential. So if you're working on a trail outdoors and you have uneven ground, make sure it's uneven. So you're leaning away from whatever side you're taking off, so that you don't lose a bunch of oil out of the differential. Now at this time you could change your axle seal there on the differential if it were leaking. If it's not leaking, it probably won't start leaking. And then also there's this seal right here on the inside of your hub that you could change, but that's more of a dust cover, kind of a dust seal. It's not really keeping any fluid in. So when you're putting in the new axle, just be careful not to damage the seal on the differential there. Make sure when you stick in the axle that you're putting it in centered and not dragging all over that. And then when you put this end of the axle back in down here, make sure you don't stab that seal and mess it up. So if nothing was leaking before and you're careful, there's probably no reason to change the seal. And especially if you're doing this again on a trail, you're probably not going to change the seal out there at all. So all right, that was giving me a little bit of trouble going in, so I grabbed the my dead blow and drove it home. You can clearly see when it's fully seated in there. It's pretty obvious. So yeah, they can be That's really the hardest part of the job, is either the axle coming out or going back in. One of the directions will probably give you trouble. All right, so now we can just take our big brake and hub assembly here and grab the axle with one hand and then carefully steer it into the hub and just kind of work it around, and it'll fall into place just like that. You can see the axle coming through here now. All right, next you want to get these bolts. There's these two bolts that we removed from the knuckle right here. You want to get those back in there. I'm going to put a little thread lock on there just for good measure. This moves around a lot, so it's fairly easy to get the holes lined up usually. Make sure they get started straight and you don't cross thread them. That would be very, very unfortunate. Well, getting the first one lined up is easy. Alright, it wasn't being super easy, so I turned the steering wheel a little bit, and that lined it up real nicely. You want to tighten these two bolts to 118 foot-pounds. So I've seen online there's some confusion about the axle nut size. Now from the factory it's 35 millimeters. I just got this axle nut off the new CV axle, which came from CarQuest, and it's a 36 millimeter. But from the factory it's 35. So as long as you have factory CVs and they haven't been changed with anything else but original equipment CVs, it's going to be 35. So I'm just going to reuse this axle nut, which is totally fine because it's held in place with a cotter pin. You want to tighten this nut to 174 foot-pounds. That's probably about right. Line up your retainer there so you can get the cotter pin back in there. Oh, there we go. Bend that cotter pin around so it can't come out. No magic to it, just so that it can't slide out back through that hole. There you go. And then just put your dust cap back on. And there you have it. The new CV axle is in. Alright, I wanted to do a little post-mortem on this axle. You can see that it spins freely. So let's see what broke in here. It's good to know what broke so we just understand what's going on. So, what we have here, we have these bearings that ride in this groove right here, and are supposed to be held in by this cage like that. So what broke is the bearing cage. And after that broke, then all the bearings fell out, and then nothing happens here anymore because the bearings aren't in their grooves in the end of the axle anymore. So when I've had CVs break before, this is what breaks the cage. That's the weak point right there. Well, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you got something out of that video so that when you need to change a CV axle, you might remember something that I did and make the job easier. I really like not removing the brakes and not removing the tie rod. It makes it a really fast job. You can probably do that job in about 20 minutes if everything goes smoothly. If I was going to stay IFS, I have a front locker, and if I was going to stay independent front suspension, I would definitely 100% guaranteed be upgrading to RCV axles. They're a ton stronger. They're made with special steel that's a lot stronger, and that bearing cage won't snap in those ones. They cost a lot of money, but you can rely on them, and that could be pretty valuable. And it would be to me if going forward if I were staying independent front suspension. Anyways, hey, I mentioned that I was going to use the factory bottle jack. I ended up not. Sometimes when you change the axles, the lower control arm is really low and you can't push up on it by hand, so you got to use a second jack to push up on that to get those holes back lined up with your hub. So I didn't have to use it today, but just keep in mind you might have to use a jack to push up on the lower control arm. If you like the video, give me a like and subscribe if you haven't already, so I can share new content with you every Monday and Thursday, and we'll see you next time.